It's 6:35. Robert J. Wright, Aaron McCarty, 101.7 FM and 710 Keel. Keel app's a free download, presented as always by Office Furniture Source. From Baton Rouge, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards is joining us for a bit. Governor, thank you for joining us. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Robert. I'm doing fine, thank you.
There is, you probably know this fellow, Herm Edwards. He was on ESPN. He's now a football coach, I think, Arizona State, and he's got a phrase that goes, "A goal without a plan is just a wish." As you and the legislators begin the special session, what's your goal? What's your plan?
Well, the goal is to fix our fiscal cliff in a way that promotes fairness in our tax structure, but also stability and predictability going forward, which is why I believe we ought to use the recommendations that came from the task force of experts who studied this issue for the legislature and gave us a report. And then obviously the plan is to do that, to select from among those recommendations enough to fix the cliff, which is $994 million, which is a lot of money. But it's less than is falling off the books, and that kind of helps to keep it in perspective. We had a shortfall of over $2 billion for the first full fiscal year while I was governor. We've made tremendous progress. What we're trying to fix now is a little less than $1 billion. The good news is we've got $1.38 billion fallen off the books on June 30th because the way the legislature approached this issue in 2016 was to do temporary revenue measures. And along with those revenue measures, we've made significant cuts over the time that I've been governor. We've also achieved savings. And then more recently, we've actually had some economic growth, which has caused the revenue forecast to improve somewhat. And so with all of those things combined, we've got the problem down to about $994 million. That's still an awful lot of money, which is why the cuts that would have to happen if we don't fix it are so draconian. And really, it's compounded because you can only make the cuts from about $3.5 billion slice of the general fund budget over which we have discretion. The rest
Everybody else is protected? Everything else is protected?
Well, everything else has some measure of protection. If you look at the general fund, it's about $9.4 billion. What we have discretion over is about $3.4 billion. The rest of it is protected for things like K through 12 education, debt service, paying on the UAL, making supplemental payments to police officers around the state, all of those sorts of things. And so that's why time and time again, when big cuts are on the table, if we have to make them, the only two places that there are big pots of money is health care and higher education. And by the way, that is why over the 8 years before I became governor, higher education was cut more than any other state in the nation, and tuition increased to try to offset those cuts more than any other state in the nation.
Let me ask you, you mentioned the $9.4 billion. This sounds like, it's a simple but moronic question, I guess. It's the biggest general fund budget in our state's history with our population declines, et cetera. That's what I don't understand, why we have the biggest general fund budget in our state's history. Can you help with that?
Well, first of all, you're wrong. 10 years ago, it was $10.4 billion.
Now, that was after Katrina when we got the infusion of money. So that one's a little anomaly.
Well, but it's still true. And then it was whittled down over the years. But it's still true. I mean, you can't say it's the largest in our history, Aaron, because it just isn't so. But what I can tell you is we have the fifth lowest tax burden in the country when it comes to both state and local taxes. We run a balanced budget. One of the reasons that the state of Louisiana has more revenue at the state level is because of the way the Constitution was set up in the early 70s, where we do more for local government than other states. And we limit how they can raise their own revenue, but we guarantee them that we are going to pay for things at the local level that other states don't. But if you take those two things together, we have the fifth lowest in the country, and we run balanced budgets.
Speaking of taxes, you got a letter from 14, signed by 14 state senators. locally for the Shreveport area. Greg Tarver, John Milkovich signed on to that. And I think the term they used was compressing tax rates.
Yeah.
But for some people in at some income levels, it would raise the income tax rate from 4 to 6%, a 50% increase for, I think it's people making between $30,000 and $60,000. That's a compromise they sent to you. How do you feel about that? And that's a tax raise, right?
Well, it would be an increase in that portion of our taxes overall, and quite frankly, I'm going to talk more about that letter in just a moment. My plan is to actually reduce revenue because we got revenue measures that are expiring on June 30th that total $1.38 billion in revenue. Of that amount, I'm trying to keep $994 million. That letter that you referenced from Senate Democrats, they say they don't want to go to $994 million. They want a standstill budget, and so they had the obligation then, I guess, to include revenue measures that would make up the difference between the $994 million that I'm advocating for and the standstill budget amount, which is about $150 million more. And I think they put options in their letter that could get us to that standstill budget.
But that's pardon me, that's a 50% tax increase for a slew of Louisianans. What do you think about that?
Well, it's not the direction that I am trying to move. I've been in meetings with the House leadership, including the Speaker. My goal at this point in time would not be to do the tax brackets. It would be to accept a recommendation that I got from the other side, which, by the way, I don't like it, but it's kind of what compromise looks like, and that is to keep a portion of the fifth penny that is expiring rather than look at the brackets again. And the reason that I'm able to do that is because the actions taken by Congress in December will increase the amount of individual income tax that we do collect just by virtue of the law that we have on the books today. It doesn't require any changes from the state of Louisiana. And, we're one of, I think, 3 or 4 states in the country that offer a deduction for federal tax liability. And so as your federal tax liability goes down, so does the deduction. As the deduction goes down, you pay a little more to the state. And so that the task force recommendation was that we increase our revenue on the individual income tax side. So I am trying to make the case now that what Congress did in December does that for us, but we still have to make up the 994. I mean, it's math. We got to get there, and there's only so many options available to us. And I know that we're going to ultimately have to compromise, and that's why I am willing to accept moving forward some part of that fifth penny.
Speaking of compromise, a lot of legislators on the more conservative side are calling for a few changes in Medicaid, including co-pays and work requirements. Is that something that's on the table as far as you're concerned?
Oh, yeah, it's on the table. And in fact, there's an agreement in principle to do those things. I don't know whether you were tuned in. A couple of months ago, I went before the press club here in Baton Rouge and talked about work requirements long before CMS came out with their guidelines out of Washington about what they would look for in work requirements. It's something that we've actually been looking at for a while, and we've had consultants that have been working with us to fashion a proposal. And now that we've got the CMS guidelines, I think we can put something together. And in fact, had a meeting yesterday with a couple of state representatives who are working on that bill. The co-pays are a little harder, not because I'm opposed to them, but we saw this happen 2 years ago. Providers look at co-pays as rate cuts because at the end of the day, the individual gets the service whether they make the co-pay or not. And if they don't make the co-pay, then it's the actual provider who eats that. So we're moving forward in a way that hopefully we'll get that done. I'm not so sure that it will happen because the providers came to the Capitol 2 years ago when we had a co-pay bill that was actually part of my package and convinced the legislature and the House Health and Welfare Committee, I think it was, not to do it. And so it never got out of the first committee. But it's certainly something on the table, something we're looking at. And I will tell you, Robert, there's not a single so-called budget reform that the House Republicans have put on the table that we can't agree to. Now, there's some details that have to be worked out, but we're trying to work through all of that because we are working towards what should be a compromise that fixes this problem in a permanent fashion, so that we're not back on this radio program or anywhere else talking about these problems. We'll have other things we need to talk about, but we ought not be talking about these issues over and over again over the next several years.
The $600 million in cuts. A lot of people have been confused by this, Governor. Jay Darden in August said we haven't made cuts. We've made fund shifts, or whatever he wanted to call it. You say we've made $600 million in cuts. Some say they're deferred payments. Can you explain that to us simply so we understand what you're referring to when you keep saying $600 million in cuts have been made?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jay has never said we haven't made cuts. He said that there's been a combination of cuts, and that there were means of finance swaps and other things that we've had to do over the years. He's never said we haven't made cuts. Let me just get you to a high altitude perspective for just a moment.
Okay.
For the first full fiscal year that I was governor, there was a shortfall that exceeded $2 billion. Almost all the revenue that was raised by the legislature to address that was short-term and expires on June 30th. And here we are talking about a $994 million problem with respect to the shortfall. You don't get from $2 billion to $994 unless you've made hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts. And I will tell you that the cuts that we have made since I've been governor well exceed $600 million. I will stand by that, absolutely. And in fact, a list of cuts went out recently.
Are some of them deferred payments, though?
No.
Okay.
Not the cuts that I'm talking about. Now, there have been some deferred payments, and really the deferred payments are, I think you're talking about the 13th payment to the MCOs. What happened was,
Governor, pardon me, it's the NOLA.com report that $300 million of that $600 million was deferred payments to Medicaid providers.
Well, Robert, all I'm going to tell you is I don't know what NOLA.com is reporting. I can tell you we've made well over $600 million in cuts, not including the deferred payment, and I know that list is out there. Now, there have been some deferred payments on the MCOs. The deferrals actually started before I became governor. I don't know if you remember, but in December, maybe it was November of 2015, in order to meet a mid-year deficit, Governor Jindal proposed that the 13th payment, what would have been that year, the 12th payment, not be made, and then kick that 13th payment into my term. And so we've been struggling to make that payment ever since.
Oil prices are up, closing in on $65 a barrel.
$62.50 yesterday is what I saw, but
okay.
I'm that's good news. It's a heck of a lot better than $26.
Does that help change the deficit we're facing?
It does, and the REC, the Revenue Estimating Conference, they look at a whole host of factors, and when they decide what revenue they're going to forecast. And so they do look at the change in the oil prices, and if those changes are positive, then they will increase their forecast. But so that's built into that $994 million figure that I gave you, because that figure comes straight from the REC. That's not my number, but it's in there.
Your fifth special session since you've been governor. Are you tired of having to do this?
Well, I think we should all be tired of it. The problem stays the same. The solutions stay the same. The recommendations from the task force stay the same. The only thing that hadn't happened is the legislature hadn't acted. Look, this is a fiscal cliff. We had a fiscal session in 2017, and the legislature specifically told the people of Louisiana, we're going to do some short-term stuff in 2016, and we're going to study it. We're going to get recommendations from experts, and in 2017, we're going to fix the problem. Not a single bill got out of the Ways and Means Committee last year in the House of Representatives that was designed to fix the cliff. And so here we are. It wasn't just predictable, it was predicted. But having said all that, I'm optimistic that we can get it done. The conversations that I've had with members of the legislature have been much more positive this time than previously. Still a lot of work to do. It's hard. I mean, the sorts of decisions that we're making are decisions that you don't like. just by definition, you don't like them. But because you don't like them doesn't mean you don't have to make them, because these problems aren't going to go away. And we need to stabilize, because we have a tremendous amount of momentum in our state right now. We're down to 4.6% unemployment, for example. That's the lowest it's been in 10 years. We're attracting economic development projects and investment that's creating even more jobs and maintaining jobs that we already have. And we have stabilized higher education so that we have tremendous amounts of kids who are already requesting admission in the fall, both in our community technical colleges and our universities, and a tremendous increase in out-of-state students who want to come here to be educated. So in many ways, we are doing so much better, but we have to fix this problem if we're going to maintain that momentum.
Governor John Bel Edwards, thanks so much for your time. Look forward to doing it again soon.
Well, thank you.